When you look around the internet, you can see very different opinions on porn. Is it harmful or is it harmless? Is porn addiction real or is it not? If you're currently using porn, should you stop? And if you are struggling to stop, what should or shouldn't you do? Welcome to the Quit by Healing podcast. On today's episode, we'll look at what the cause of all this confusion is, why there are such strongly differing opinions, and you'll see why this matters. Basically, what's happening here is that most people are not aware that there are levels to porn addiction. It is not a black and white thing. And when I look around at the world of content online surrounding porn and porn addiction, I see a totally black and white worldview. Generally, people fall into one of two camps on this topic. On the one hand, you have the sex positive camp, which says, listen, there's absolutely nothing wrong with porn. It's completely harmless. It's everybody's right and everybody's choice to get off on whatever they want, and it's all good. And on the other side, you have the no-fap camp, where the idea is usually that porn is extremely harmful and toxic, and possibly it is responsible for the downfall of humanity. This is often also conflated with some kind of a religious viewpoint, where you say, look, it's not just, a problem in terms of, it's bad for you, for your health or for your brain or something like that, but also, it's sinful, and porn is this degeneracy, it's spreading degeneracy, and it's somehow a spiritual challenge even. So that is the black and white worldview that we're normally presented online. And it makes sense that most people want to believe in one of these two extremes. So on the one hand, if you think of yourself as a casual porn user, then you don't want to think about, hey, maybe I'm doing some serious harm to myself. Maybe there will be some long-term consequences that will be very unpleasant. You don't want to think of yourself as an addict. So you'd much rather believe, no, it's all fine. This is totally normal. This is totally harmless, right? You want to believe the extreme, let's say, denial side of the story. On the other hand, if you have actually experienced how badly porn addiction can affect you, it has maybe cost you a relationship. It has maybe cost you a marriage even. You've maybe suffered some really serious consequences because of your porn addiction. Then, of course, you're very prone to believe every negative thing that you hear about it. And also, if you're trying to overcome porn addiction, but you find yourself struggling with it, you keep relapsing, it's this huge struggle and frustrating battle that you're fighting, then of course, your perception is that this is some kind of an evil thing that is controlling your life. So again, it makes sense that you are falling into that extreme when it comes to your beliefs about porn and porn addiction. However, reality is not black and white. Things in the real world tend to be more nuanced and a little more complicated. And it's important to acknowledge this because there are different levels to porn addiction, and people not realizing that there are different levels to porn addiction is why there's so much confusion and disagreement, and also why there's often bad advice. Basically, bad advice is being handed out because the same ideas, the same kinds of advice do not apply depending on how severely addicted someone is. So let's clear this up. Let's think of porn addiction as something that has levels to it, or it's a gradient, right, where you go from very weakly addicted to severely addicted. And I want to propose a model here. Let's just divide this into 5 levels, okay? We have porn addiction from level 1, which is mild, to level 5, which is severe. And this is only for people who use porn. So if someone doesn't use porn at all, they're not on this scale, they'd be a 0, okay? But among everyone who uses porn, which at this point is almost everyone, let's categorize that into these 5 levels. So I lay out these 5 levels, and then we'll talk about the practical implications, the things, the lessons you can draw from this, and how you can apply this for yourself if you are trying to overcome porn addiction. All right, so a level 1 on this scale from 1 to 5 would be someone who uses porn but only occasionally, maybe once a week or less, which means that yes, they do sometimes use porn, but it's not regular, right? It's not on a regular schedule. It's not like every day or every other day or something like that. And it's not often enough for it to be deeply habit forming. Okay, because if you're doing something, maybe this week you do it and then you don't do it for 2 weeks, and then maybe you do it twice and then you don't do it for a month, that kind of thing, right? That kind of occasional non-regular use will not be habit forming. It will not be like rewiring your brain in any way. And we could talk about, whether this is still harmful or not, but it is kind of like someone who, smokes a cigarette a couple of times a year, where you can say, yeah, it's probably still harming their lungs in some way, but it's so rare and it's so clearly not a habit that we really don't have to worry about it. This kind of porn use, occasional, non-regular, is more common among women who are less stimulated, who are like less hooked by porn than men tend to be. So among men, this is pretty rare that you have an occasional porn user like this, but still it's possible it happens. So that would be our level 1, occasional non-regular use. On the other end of the scale, this is really important. A level 5 is someone who is severely addicted. And it's important to talk about this because most people don't realize how bad it can get. And certainly anyone who talks about, who has doubts about porn addiction, who's like, oh, porn addiction can't be real or something like that, you just haven't realized how bad this can get. So as a baseline idea, I would say that a level 5 is anyone who spends more than an hour every day on their porn addiction. So more than an hour a day masturbating to porn. And for severe addicts, this can often be a lot more. You might have people who spend several hours at a time and sometimes more than once a day edging to porn. But another really important aspect of this is not just the porn habit itself, but also for a severe addict, this thing will take up a lot of mental space. So in their everyday life, they tend to over-sexualize things. And they might do things like as they're walking around in the real world, they see women, they kind of constantly stare at women and they might imagine those women naked, right? So they're constantly on the lookout for an attractive looking woman and then imagining what that woman looks like naked and then maybe starting to fantasize about having sex with that woman. So even in their everyday life, this addiction has really taken over a lot of their mind space and a lot of their attention. This also has the consequence of being really socially isolating because you start reducing everyone to a sex object, which makes it very hard for you to actually just relate to people on a human level. Here's an example of how crazy this can get. And this is an example that the author George Collins, who wrote the book Breaking the Cycle, explains in his book. Back when he was struggling with his own addiction, here's something that happened to him. He was driving on the highway, and in front of him he saw a car, BMW, an open-top BMW, with a blonde, with like a long hair waving in the wind. And he saw this driver in front of him, this car in front of him with the blonde inside, and he started to think, oh, she must be an attractive woman. And he started to fantasize about this woman. And as he was following this car, or as the car was in front of him, he started to think, oh, the reason she's driving in front of me is like she's driving in front of me deliberately to try and get my attention. He started to interpret this as some kind of an invitation. And he ended up actually not going where he was originally intending to drive, but just following this car. He kept following this car, fantasizing about what might happen with this blonde, and then followed this car off an exit. And only later, as he pulled up next to the car, did he realize the driver was actually a man who just happened to have long blonde hair. And so, of course, this story is a bit embarrassing, but I think it's a great illustration of how much this can take over your life and how you can get carried away in a completely ridiculous fantasy. But it gets so bad that you actually change your plans and you don't drive to where you originally wanted to drive. You end up following some car somewhere. You end up doing completely irrational things because of this addiction. Another example is a story that Anna Lemke shares in her book Dopamine Nation of one of her clients who built some kind of an electrical stimulation device that he hooked up to his genitals and used this to stimulate himself. It was essentially like a masturbation machine that he used, and he used this to stimulate himself hours and hours at a time. He was completely addicted to this, so this would also be a level 5 addict. And this cost him a marriage, right? So it gets so bad that the addiction takes over your life to the degree where you end up getting divorced, or someone ends up getting divorced with you because they can't put up with. You've become this sex-crazed addict. You're no longer the person that they originally married. And then, of course, something that's also worth mentioning here, I've talked about this in other contexts, there are many porn addicts who have trouble with real sex, so they can't get an erection anymore unless they're watching porn. And A severe addict will typically have pretty much lost their ability to have actual sex, right? They need the stimulation from porn, and they might need the stimulation from really extreme porn. They might be watching stuff that is highly disturbing, possibly even illegal, and that's the only way that they can even get an erection anymore. So those are some examples of how extreme it can get. Those are some examples of how severe the addiction can get. And I think it's important that we talk about this because most people don't assume that it can get this bad, don't realize that it can get this bad until it happens to them or it happens to someone they know. So you don't take it very seriously. Again, if you have people talking about, oh, I don't think porn addiction is real, you have no idea how bad it can get until it happens. And of course, once you're that badly addicted, once you've completely ruined your life with this addiction, the idea that maybe porn addiction isn't real becomes completely ridiculous. Obviously, it's real. Okay, so those are the two extremes, right? Level 1, the occasional user. Level 5, the super severely addicted user. Level 3 would be your typical, unfortunately, your typical porn user. I would say that the majority of men walking around the world today are somewhere around the level 3 with their addiction. So this is someone who will be using porn most days. Maybe not every single day, but, most days. And they're probably not, edging to porn for hours and hours. Their sessions are going to be shorter than that. And importantly, they use porn regularly. It's clearly a habit, but it hasn't completely taken over their lives yet. This is a level 3 addict is someone who is still able to function normally in their life. So they can walk around the world and not fantasize about every woman they see. And they can probably still have sex in real life. So they might have already experienced some boner problems, right? They might have experienced like erectile dysfunction, even though they're quite young and stuff like that. But it's possible that they don't realize this has anything to do with porn. And it's not that it's, like I said, it doesn't completely destroy their ability to have sex. They can still have sex more often than not. Someone can be a level 3 addict and be in denial about their own addiction. When it gets more severe, you'll probably start to notice and you'll probably have to admit to yourself at some point, okay, I'm addicted. Level 3 is like the last level where you can still be in denial about it. And only once it gets worse, you realize, okay, this is a serious problem now. But of course, even at level 3, it is already a problem. It is already doing serious harm to yourself. And the easiest way to find out is to try and quit. Because when you quit, you basically notice how severe your addiction was by how strong your withdrawal symptoms are. So the typical guy who is a level 3 addict, who's maybe in denial about their addiction, if they try to quit, they'll actually find that they really, really struggle and that they'll go through some difficult withdrawal experiences. And unfortunately, most guys will simply give up, right? Most guys, unless they really put some effort into this and really put some strategies in place, they will actually not be able to quit from their level 3 addiction. It's already progressed that far. So this is a level of addiction where just trying is usually not enough. You need to bring some strategy into this. You need to be deliberate and smart about how you do this. All right, so that is the levels. Now you can imagine, of course, a level 2 is basically someone who's in between. They're not quite as addicted as the level 3 addict, but it's more regular, right? They're just somewhere in between level 1 and 3. And then the same, a level 4 addict is somewhere in between what I described for level 3 and the extreme severe addiction of level 5, somewhere in between there. So that way we can roughly categorize level 1 to level 5. This is what it looks like. And right now you can assess yourself and you can ask yourself, okay, where do I fall on this scale? Now, with that said, what are the practical implications of this? Here are 4 points that we can derive from these different levels of porn addiction that are useful and important to know about. Number 1, realize that as with any addiction, with porn addiction, there is a tendency to escalation. So it tends to get worse over time because as you keep using porn, you get desensitized to it. You get desensitized to the stimulation, which means that you need more stimulation more often in order to get the same kind of kick out of it. And this means that in general, people start escalating. You might start using it more and more often. And also typically you seek out more and more extreme fetishes, or you basically keep seeking variety, right? The same old thing isn't exciting anymore. And so you seek out, you look for a different kind of porn. You look for something new and exciting. And eventually that leads to more and more extreme stuff. That means that for most people, if you start using porn, you will gradually drift from a level 1 severity of addiction towards level 5. And of course, that progression can take a long time. But for most users, they're gradually drifting towards a more and more extreme form of addiction. Also, the further your addiction has progressed, the more likely it is to progress further. Which is to say that if you're a level 1 porn user, you're an occasional but non-regular porn user, you might stay there, you might stay at that level for a long time. But if you're a level 4 addict, it's only a matter of time before that escalates to level 5. So unless you intervene, unless you do something about it, the tendency of an addiction is always that it gets worse and more extreme over time. Number 2, your brain looks different at different levels of addiction. One of the most frequently asked questions I get is, how long does it take for my brain to heal from the effects of porn addiction? And the answer is that it varies hugely depending on how severely addicted you are and how long you've been addicted for. So someone who is a level 1 or a level 2, if they apply the right strategies, if they decide, hey, I want to stop using porn, and they apply the right strategies, they're clever about how they do this, they could resolve this in a matter of a few weeks. They could get over the habit. And then, in terms of brain chemistry and stuff, maybe within a few months or so, they're at a point where they just don't have any cravings for porn anymore. And this is a done deal, right? Because they just weren't that addicted to begin with. But if someone is at a level 4 or a level 5, then they've got a lot of work to do in order to undo all of this deeply wired, like the habit is so deeply wired in their brain. You simply can't expect to have someone who's, severely addicted and maybe has been addicted for decades and then expect that will resolve itself in a short amount of time. It is going to take a long time. Another important point here is that the more severe your addiction, the more out of control it feels. So with an addiction like this, it's normal that basically something triggers you and then autopilot takes over. So when something triggers you to start watching porn, it feels like something takes over and you go on your porn binge almost without doing anything, almost like it's not you doing it. It's not you making conscious decisions at that point. And the more severe your addiction is, the more extreme that effect will be. So an extreme addict might be triggered by something and then they almost fall into a trance-like state where they go through their process and go do their whole extreme porn binge, and they don't seem to gain back any kind of self-control until after they're finished. It's like they completely lose control. And they also might find that they're much more easily triggered into this trance-like autopilot mode state, whereas someone who's less severely addicted will not be that easily triggered, and they will find it easier to kind of retain or wrestle back control once something triggers them. Number 3. Different kinds of advice apply for different levels of addiction. So let me give you an example of this. Imagine that we have 2 addicts. One of them is at a level 2, so they're like mildly addicted. The other one is at a level 5, they're extremely addicted. Both of them are currently in a relationship. So both of them have a partner with whom they could have sex. And both of them obviously want to quit porn. Now, for our first addict, for the level 2 addict, a great idea is to quit porn and to communicate with their partner about their sexual needs and sexual desires and make sure that they can essentially replace, quote unquote, replace their porn habit with real sex. Because it's quite likely that this type of addict, one of the reasons they're using porn is probably because maybe there's a couple of things, maybe they're not having sex as often as they would like, or maybe there are some things that they want to do, but they haven't had the courage to ask their partner for, or they're just slightly dissatisfied with their sex life, maybe even very dissatisfied with their sex life. But porn can be like this fake sex replacement for the real thing, right? Ultimately, there's a desire here to experience the real thing. You somehow feel like you can't get the real thing, so you escape to porn. And so it's quite likely, again, for the mild addict, for the level 2 addict, it's quite likely that, hey, if you work out What are the things that you're seeking in porn that you're not getting in real life? You have a discussion with your partner about that. You do some work with your partner to be like, hey, what can we do to make our sex life more satisfying for both of us? You could easily get into a situation where it's like, hey, now I'm more satisfied with my sex life and with my partner in such a way that I really don't want porn anymore. And, instead of, so there's certain things where it's like, oh, I'm feeling a little horny. What I used to do is just go for porn. Now I go, oh, I feel a little horny. This is exciting. Let me message my partner, or let me go over, because I feel like there's a new way to deal with that sexual energy, to deal with that sexual desire I'm feeling. And it's actually better. I prefer it. So for a mild addict, this kind of idea is like, hey, just redirect this energy, redirect this attention to your partner and to your real sex life. This could be a great solution. But for the level 5 addict, this won't work at all. Because first of all, they've probably lost their ability to have sex in real life altogether, right? They probably can't get hard at all with their partner. So right away, there's a problem. But also, they're in a situation where anything sexual will trigger them into their hypnotized state and into the porn binge. And also, the underlying issues are probably much more severe. In my previous example, right, I talked about how the underlying issue of the level 2 addict might just be like some dissatisfaction with their sex life. Well, for a level 5 addict, there's probably more going on. It's probably more extreme than that. Even if it started out as just dissatisfaction with your real sex life, by the time it's escalated that far, there's a whole bunch of like shame and all kinds of other problems tied in with that. And telling the level 5 addict, hey, just have more sex with your wife or something like that, it's just not going to work at all. And in fact, the level 5 addict will probably need to abstain from anything sexual for a while to reset his brain and reset his biology. It's probably better to obviously quit porn, stop masturbating, and don't even have sex with your partner for a while to give your body a chance to reset and not trigger yourself with anything sexual. And really what you have to do at that level of addiction is probably kind of try to reset your body and brain and then kind of rebuild from scratch. Obviously, the goal is still to get to the point where instead of all this crazy addiction stuff you're doing, you end up having a normal, healthy sex life with your partner. But here, you probably have to kind of break it all down, reset your system, and then try to build it up from scratch. So it's a very different approach. Another thing I would say to contrast these two examples is that, a level 2 addict can easily deal with this problem themselves. With a few strategies, with a bit of effort, they can overcome their addiction. A level 5 addict, get therapy, get professional help. If you're that far down the rabbit hole, get all the help you can get. A similar idea applies to masturbation. If you're familiar with my content, you know that I recommend making a separation between masturbation and porn. And for most porn addicts, if you can keep yourself away from porn, if you can stay porn free by masturbating without porn, that's a win. And that is fine if you can get to the point where you're like 90 days porn free. Even if you keep masturbating, that's a win, right? For a lot of porn addicts, it's much easier to quit porn first. And then once you're porn free, you can look at, okay, what's my masturbation habit like? Am I doing this excessively? Am I fantasizing about porn stuff while I'm masturbating? If that's the case, then you probably also want to do something about that. You want to reduce your masturbation. You want to learn kind of a healthier, more connected with your body way of masturbating rather than holding on to the porn habit. But the point being, for most addicts, and I would say like level 1 to level 3 for sure, use masturbation as a way to manage your urges and stay away from porn until you get to at least 90 days porn free. However, if you're more severely addicted, if you're level 4, certainly a level 5, you'll probably find that, like I mentioned before, anything sexual will immediately trigger you into this hypnotized state. And the attempt to masturbate without porn actually just triggers you into a porn binge. And so then the advice, again, the same advice does not apply to the same people. There it's like, no, I'm sorry, you have to be totally abstinent. Yes, this is going to suck, right? But you have to be completely abstinent. You have to stay away from anything sexual for long enough to give your brain and body a chance to reset. And finally, point number 4, the most important tool you can develop is awareness. So if you want to overcome your porn addiction, the most important thing to develop is awareness. On the one hand, it's important because awareness is the antidote to this autopilot mode problem that I've been talking about. Awareness is the opposite of that, like being able to stay aware and, for example, becoming aware of your triggers, realizing, oh, that thing, whatever, this social media post is triggering me, and being aware of that thing happening in your body, being aware of what does this feel like in my body, what kind of thoughts are going through my mind when I see this thing that triggers me. Deeper awareness is how you prevent yourself from falling into that autopilot mode. And deeper awareness is also what lays bare to you exactly what are my triggers, exactly what is the story I tell myself in my mind and so on. The more aware you are of that stuff, the less power it has over you. And this is the reason I recommend so many different writing exercises. And by the way, if you join my free Discord community, you can also get a short course in there about how to do introspective writing, which is an approach to writing that is, from what I've found, is the most effective way to cultivate deeper awareness. So that is something you can get completely for free. Check out the description of this podcast episode for the link to join my Discord community and access that course. Awareness is also important because you have to have this self-responsibility. So like I've just explained, depending on your individual circumstances, depending on who you are, what your history is, and how severe your addiction is, different kinds of advice will be useful or useless for you. And really, nobody can tell you this, right? There is no best way to quit porn. There's no best strategy for quitting porn, even though everybody's constantly looking for that, of course. Right? It would be nice if I could just tell you, look, here's the one best thing you can do that will help you quit porn, guaranteed. But that doesn't exist because, like we've seen now, different ideas, different kinds of advice apply for different people. And you have to have the awareness to be able to detect that. So you try out a strategy and you see what happens. Does this work for me? Does it not work for me? What triggers me? What helps me deal with the triggers? And so on, right? You have to have that awareness. So specifically, my recommendation is that you try different strategies, and I've shared loads of strategies on my YouTube channel, on my TikTok, in my Discord. I have lots and lots of different strategies that you can use in order to deal with triggers, in order to overcome your porn addiction, and basically all the aspects of it. But the reason I share many different strategies, not just one, is because what I encourage you to do is that you try them out. And ideally, in writing, you document what happens. So maybe you go into my Discord and you come across the embodiment method, which I think is a fantastic strategy. But I also know, look, even though what I just said, look, I think this is a really good strategy. I think everybody who struggles with porn addiction should try the embodiment method because there's a good chance that this will help you a lot. But I'm also aware that for some people, it's not going to work, right? For some people, this is going to be the solution. For some people, it's going to be like, yeah, okay, it helped me a little bit. And for some people, it's probably not going to work at all. But only you can find out. And you have to have the awareness to say, okay, I tried this strategy and here's what's happening. And you also have to have the awareness to find out when you're fooling yourself, okay? Because that's a big part of addiction, is that there's almost like the addict part of your brain is trying to trick you and is trying to convince you, is trying to talk you into relapsing. And the only solution for this is awareness, is to notice, when am I fooling myself? When is my addict self trying to get me to relapse? So that's really the most important takeaway here. And that's why I talked about these 5 levels of addiction to begin with. Because as long as you think that everything is black and white and there's just one correct solution, you'll be blind to this. Realizing that, hold on, there's different levels of addiction and different stuff applies depending on what level someone's at, makes you realize that different kinds of advice you find online, like some of it will apply to you and some of it won't. And this is why. And again, the only solution, the tool you have to have here in order to make this work for you is have awareness, try it out and be aware. And really, that would be the big takeaway for me, right? If you are struggling with porn addiction, if you want to overcome porn addiction, the best thing you can do is experiment and deepen your awareness. Because as long as you're trying different strategies and you are documenting what works and doesn't, and you're learning from your mistakes. So, almost everybody who tries to quit will relapse. You'll try something, it doesn't work, you relapse, you probably feel bad about it, and that's fine. But as long as you use this as an opportunity to learn, to say, okay, Apparently something didn't work yet. How do I, instead of just being frustrated and feeling bad and then trying the same thing again, only to fail again, bring awareness to this and go, okay, why did I fail? What exactly happened? What can I change? What can I do to not fail next time? What can I do to not make the same mistake twice? If you do that consistently, you keep trying, you keep bringing deeper and deeper awareness to what happens, eventually you will succeed. All right, so that's it for the 5 levels of addiction. I hope you found this helpful and insightful. And I'd love to hear from you. So if you have any comments or questions about this, here's what you can do. You can go to the YouTube version of this podcast episode and leave a comment there, or you can click the link in the description to leave me a voice message. So in the description, there's a link to a page where there's a message button where you can also subscribe to this podcast on various different platforms. And there's a message button that you can click there to leave me a voice message. And if you do, I will anonymize that, right? I will not read out your name, and I will slightly distort your voice so that it's completely anonymous. But this is one way in which you can leave comments or ask questions that I will answer on future episodes. So go ahead and do that. And also, if you enjoyed this episode, leave a like on YouTube, leave a positive rating on Apple Podcasts or whichever podcast platform you're listening to. It really helps, right? The world is ruled by algorithms these days, so just let the algorithm know, hey, this was good, and push it out to a few more people. You never know who we might reach and who we might help with this content. So your help is much appreciated.